Steelville, Missouri. Anita Brooks has autographed copies of her current books, Getting Through What You Can't Get Over, in its 6th consecutive week on Amazon's bestseller list, and First Hired, Last Fired, How to Become Irreplaceable in Any Job Market. Those 2 stories are available today for only $15. Anita's favorite pastime is to relax by a lake or river, laughing with her husband of over 30 years. They have 2 grown sons and 2 beautiful grandchildren. Help me welcome Anita Brooks.
I wonder if in a room with this many people, if there's someone here who could use a miracle today. Maybe for something physical, maybe for a relationship issue, or maybe a financial crisis. If so, I have good news for you, because God is still in the miracle-making business. But I want to ask you a question. Have you ever thought about this? Do you realize that you cannot experience a miracle without first having a problem? You have to have a problem, right? So the bigger the problem that you have, the bigger the opportunity for a miracle. And I was in that place several years ago where I needed a miracle. Maybe some of you can relate to feeling like you are in a black hole, a pit so deep that you're never going to be able to crawl out again. You try to scale the sides of it, and it just feels slimy. You just slide right back down to the bottom. It's called clinical depression. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Before I went through clinical depression, I was guilty of something, so this is confession time for me. In all honesty, prior to having went through it myself, I was of this mindset. Well, you just need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You need to think positive thoughts. Well, if you think happy, you'll be happy. Anybody in here ever guilty of that? Let me tell you, God has a way sometimes of putting you in your place. And that's what he did with me. But as I said, he is still in the miracle-making business. He's still in the business of taking the ashes of our lives and transforming them into crowns of beauty. And I will tell you, I am walking proof of that today. People ask me, what's your testimony? I have to laugh. Which one would you like? For those of you who have read my books or will read my books, you'll see some of the stories, especially in the new one. It was a very hard book to write. I had to talk about being in that black pit at times. But that's not even all the stories. Because see, I went through a period of my life where it just seemed like it was like a tsunami, wave after wave. My friend and I were talking about that driving in, where it was like one wouldn't even end, one crisis, and then the next one hit. Any of you familiar with the book of Job in the Bible? Well, let me tell you, it got so bad for me, I literally started referring to myself as Jobette. I mean, you know, after a while when enough things hit, you finally start seeing a little humor in it because there's nothing else you can do. If you don't laugh, you're going to cry all the time. And so I really did feel like Jobette. And this was the place I was in when I had a friend who invited me to come to something similar to this. It was in St. Louis. And only in this event, there were a little over 300 people in the room that day. Interestingly enough, at that point, at the very last minute, my friend couldn't go, even though she invited me. I cannot explain to you to this day exactly how I did it because I was in that bad a shape. I was literally like a zombie. Have you ever felt like that where you're just like going through the motions? I was barely a functioning human being. Many days I was curled up in the fetal position. I couldn't even read the Bible. All I could do was clutch it to my chest. That's how bad I was. And yet I ended up at this conference. And how many of you in this room know that sometimes when you are in that darkest place and you think, I just don't have any more strength, I can't go on. Suddenly, at just the last moment, God will shine some light into your life, give you that hope, give you the strength and the courage to take one more step. Well, that's what happened to me that day, because when I went to this conference by myself, I really was feeling like no one, I shouldn't say no one, but very few people understood what I was going through. I felt very lonely, and I had questions going through my mind such as, is God mad at me? Does he hate me? Is he punishing me? Does he even exist? I mean, that's just being honest. And I don't know if any of you ever wrestle with those kinds of questions, but I know what that's like. And so as I sat there that day and the speaker took the stage, I have to tell you, she was 73 years old, and she was 5'0" and she had this beautiful sparkling silver hair and just bright, bright blue eyes. And she begins to tell her story. Her name is Dr. Edith Eger. Edie is still alive. And she began to talk about being a prisoner of war in the Holocaust. When she was 16 years old, Edie and her sister and her parents were put onto cattle cars, had no idea where they were being taken to. They really didn't even know what was going on. I mean, these soldiers just showed up with guns and herded them in. And ladies, they stacked them, human beings on top of human beings on top of human beings. We can't even comprehend that kind of discomfort today in our 21st century, where if the air conditioning isn't working at the right temperature, we're complaining, right? 3 days they traveled in these train cars. They did not have pit stops. They were not fed. They were not given water. Talk about discomfort. Imagine not being able to use the restroom, and you try and you try and you try to hold it. The embarrassment, the humiliation, the loss of dignity that these people experienced. Now, some of you might think, I don't even want to think about that. Why are you talking about this? Ladies, I think we need to think about it. Because sometimes when we think about what somebody else is going through, it really does shed a little bit of light into our own dark pit. But as Edie spoke that day, she was just so amazing. She was an aspiring ballerina when she was loaded onto the cattle cars. And so she did like a little minuet on the stage that day. It was so amazing to watch her do it. The other thing that was amazing to me as she was telling her story was to see how freely she smiled, how readily she laughed. Because I was in that place at that point in my life where if I heard other people laugh, it almost made me angry. It was almost like, how dare you? Don't you know what's going on in my life? Because you know, when I was in that pit, I was pretty self-absorbed, honestly. I was only thinking about me. At the lunch break, after Edie had spoken for the first half of the day, they sat her in a chair and they had a meet and greet. And so everyone lined up, and have you ever been in that situation where, you know, you watch everybody else and you kind of, you know, see what the protocol is, and so you just follow suit? Well, so that's what I did. And I really thought about this as to why what I'm getting ready to tell you happened. Why did it happen? But I wasn't in the front of the line. I wasn't at the end of the line. I was just somewhere in the middle, just another face in the crowd, or so I thought. Because see, God was looking into my life. God saw the things that no one else saw. God heard the cries that no one else heard. God knew my thoughts, and he knew where I was at, and he knew what I needed that day. He knew I was in desperate need of a miracle because, frankly, ladies, I was pretty suicidal at that point. And as I got in the line and I reached Edie, I watched her with everybody else, and she just did the, brief, little, hello, how are you? And she had this real strong accent. And when I got up to her, she did the most amazing thing, and she didn't do this with anybody else. I put my hand out, and if I didn't have to hold the mic, I'd demonstrate to you. She slapped the top of my hand with her other hand as she's shaking it. And she leans forward, and I'm telling you, she had these bright, piercing blue eyes, and she goes, "We must meet." God has spoken. Now, ladies, I'm looking over my shoulder. First thought is, are you talking to me? Second thought is, I didn't hear God say anything. I just looked at her. She repeats herself. We must meet. You must come have breakfast with me in the morning. God has spoken. I said, well, I don't live close to here. I live like almost 2 hours away. And I said, and you know, my husband's not with me. I'd have to call my husband. She goes, you do whatever you must, but you will have breakfast with me in the morning. She was adamant. This lady wasn't taking no for an answer. So I went and called my husband, and I'm like, okay, you're probably gonna think I'm crazy, but this really strange thing just happened. And I tell him, and I said, she wants me to come have breakfast. And he said, well, it's up to you, you know, if you want to, and you know, you'll have to leave early in the morning. I'm like, okay. So I go back and I get the information from her. And so the next morning I left my house about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I went and met Edie at the hotel, and I had breakfast with her. Now I'm just gonna tell you right now, breakfast lasted all day long. Her flight left like at 4 something in the afternoon, and I drove her to the airport. It was just amazing. But as we sat there, Edie started telling me a little more of her story in the Holocaust, things that she hadn't shared from the stage. And she talked about how when they got off of the cattle cars, they were ushered by gunpoint, filthy dirty, you can imagine, in the hot sun, and they're just in this long, long line, a single file line. And she said it looked like it just stretched for miles. And you had no idea where you were going. So for hours, they just were shuffled forward with these guards standing on each side. And as they finally got closer, they were able to see that there was a man sitting in the chair. And in this chair, she said it looked like a very soft, comfortable, you know, chair, like a leather chair, really overstuffed. And the man was very well dressed, very well groomed. And he would just sit there, and as each person got to the head of the line, he would point left or right, left or right. And when she and her parents got up there, he pointed she and her sister into one line and her parents into the other. And she started crying. And so she ran over and she clutched her mother's arm. And the man got up out of the chair, very gently, came up and he put his hand on her shoulder. And he said, little girl, do not cry. He said, we're just sending you to the showers. You'll be reunited in a little while. And that was enough to calm Edie down. So she and her sister went through atrocious things that we can't even imagine. Strip searches, cold water coming out of fire hoses. Can you imagine the pressure of water coming out of a fire hose, how that would sting your skin? The humiliation, you know, you're 16 years old, you've never been through anything like this. You've only known the shelter and comfort of your home and the family that loves you, and you're stripped bare in front of strangers. How that would feel. When they were all done, they were given their rags to put on, and they went out into the yard, and they were looking for their parents, and they looked for quite a while and they couldn't find them. And finally, she said that she and her sister just clutched each other and they started crying together. And this old man walked up, he was another prisoner, and he said, little girls, why do you cry? And Edie said, our mama, our papa, we've looked and we can't find them anywhere. And the man pointed up to the 2 chimney red stacks with the smoke billowing out, and he said, there's your mama, there's your papa, the Nazis have killed them. And that's how they found out that their parents had been murdered.